So for the next 2 hours, I know I don't have that long. I'm just kidding. I do have a sense of humor, and that was great. And it's great to follow you, Karen, here. I think what you talked about, I'm going to take this to the next step and talk about what do we think about cyber in the future. You know, we live in exponential times. And if you think about that, everything's changing. We talk about 5G, but look at how much has changed over the last 10 years, and then what we have coming up in the next 10 years, and what that means to our countries, to our elections, to our people. I have 16 grandchildren. I know I don't look that old, thank you. Thank you very much. Every one of them is better on the network than I am. They're digital natives. They play games like Fortnite. They go out and they surf the web. They do their homework on the internet. They learn on the internet. It's changing the way we live. What I'm going to talk about is 3 key things. The technology revolution, just to put things in context. I'm going to give you a little bit about cyber attacks, but I really want to focus on what do we do about this? What can we do about this? And I want to take it from not what we have, you know, because a lot of people say they look at things and they ask why. I would like to take the approach that some of the philosophers say, let's look at the future that could be, that should be, and say, why not? How do we change the way we do cyber so that what you were bringing up is infinitely doable for all our countries? How do we protect our wealth, our knowledge, and everything that's going on in the internet for our own security together? So, new technology. There's some great sets of videos out there on YouTube that talk about did you know? There's a whole series of those. And what you find out is there's so many facts about changes on things that are going on that it's hard to keep up with it. And if you look here, I've grabbed 3 of those. Technology's doubling every 2 years. Think about what happens when 5G comes in. The amount of devices that we can now network goes to about 4,000 per square kilometer. Think about that. That's roughly a 300 by 300 meter area. That's this building or less. That's the number of devices, and it's doubling that technology that we're using every 2 years. The amount of information that we have is doubling every year. The amount of unique information that's being created is doubling every year. What does that mean? That means we'll create more information this year than the last 5,000 years combined. Think about that mathematically. That's huge. How do we use that information? How do we leverage it? We had, I had the luxury, the privilege. Okay, they forced me to testify in front of Congress. Okay, let's be more accurate. And in doing that, what you realize is that people don't understand what this means when we change the amount of information that's out there. I've had members of Congress ask me, should we outlaw the internet? True story. I thought, not if you want to be reelected, because that's the future. We shouldn't outlaw it. We should address it. And that's what forums like this are really good about. And if you think about all that information, think about what good is coming out of that. I have some friends, and some of the members of our company also serve on the Human Genome Center in the University of Chicago. They're helping put together how to solve cancer by looking at human genome, the biggest one in the world. And I'm convinced that the way they're approaching that, we'll be able to solve cancer over the next decade. This is huge. The remarkable evolution in how we solve cancer is a byproduct of the amount of data that we have and the way that we process that data. So we don't want to throw that aside. We want to embrace it. The medical capabilities, especially for all of us here and our children, it's phenomenal. So the question is, how do we protect it? Now, there are several big breakthroughs that I think are coming in. And when you think about this, one of the things that we don't really talk about is how are we going to do it? I want to give you some thoughts. If you think about technology, 5G, you think about the attacks, and I agree, the attack surface is growing. The legacy approach that we have for defending our networks will not keep up with the speed and change of the amount of data that's being created, the amount of equipment that we have, the amount of devices. We're not going to keep up with it. If you think about the shortage in cyber personnel today, and then you double the amount of data, double the speed of the equipment that's coming in 1 year you need 4 times as many people to keep up with what you're doing today. That's not viable. We have a system that's fundamentally flawed in the way that we think about it. And the adversary has all the advantage. The attacker has the advantage. A true story. How did I become commander of U.S. Cyber Command? I tell my children it was done alphabetically. That's a joke. Okay, so I'll go slower. But the reality is Russian hackers got into the Defense Department, and we solved it in 22 hours. And what Secretary Gates said is nobody else could have done that. You've led the offense, now you have the defense. The offense was more fun. The defense is extremely hard. In fact, you have to be right all the time on the defense. The offense only has to be right once. And so what you come up with as we looked at that process is the approach that we have for defending our systems is flawed. We look at signatures. We look at ways of tracking the threat that we know, and the adversary only has to change that to get by. And we have to do everything right. Having served in the Army for 40 years and having worked with soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marine, what's the chance of 10,000 military members, one of them making a mistake? It's 100%. I can guarantee it. And if that's what you have doing your network, what's the chance that your network will have a mistake in it and be penetrated? That's the problem. I'll give you another set of things. Not only do we lack talent, we have all these regulations that come up with. And I was talking to some of the countries that are represented here today, and when you think about it, who's in charge of your cybersecurity? Who's in charge? And how do you do it? So, I think what we need to talk about is a different approach. And what I want to give you is an assessment of that different approach and how we do it. First, we talk about hardware, we're talking about all this, but it's actually software that's running on it. How do you see the data at network speed? And I want to give you a word picture about what we do wrong in 2 ways. First, when you think about cybersecurity today, what we talk about is every company, every department defends itself. And it shares what it knows, oftentimes with ledgers. After you've looked at reputational risk, you've gone to your boss to make sure you're not going to embarrass them. You go to your board, and then you share it. And that's only after you found it, and it's normally been there for, Verizon says, up to 100 days. So they're in the network, they have free roam. We defend ourselves, we can't see the events. So that leads us to 3 key things that we have to address. How do you see what's going on in the network at network speed? How do you share it? And why do we all defend our own? Why don't we work together? Imagine air traffic. Many of you flew to get here. I flew to get here. And you have air traffic control that's run by all these radars that track all these airplanes and make sure they don't bump into each other. That's a good thing. We don't want them to bump into each other, especially when we're on them, right? So you have a picture that shows air traffic. Friendly aircraft have a transponder. Enemy aircraft look different. You have ways of tracking those. In cyberspace, we don't have a picture. You can't explain what's going on. And the consequence is there is no collective defense. What I explained to Secretary Gates and then Secretary Panetta is you can't defend what you can't see. We're responding to attacks. We're not defending. In fact, that's where we all are today. Every company responds to events. They can't share it in time for their government to do anything about it. And there is no way to collectively see those attacks going on at network speed across your nation or collectively across ours. Why? Partly, and I think what you brought up, Karen, before, well, this is the way we started it out. When we built IBM Selectric typewriters, we didn't think about working them together. And it's interesting, when you think about, and when I go back to our Revolutionary War, what it was about bringing the civilian and the military together. Everybody had to work together because we all were invested in this area. And cyber is exactly the same. It's where we are all together, government and industry. It affects all of us. The government is the only one that can attack back. And industry sees 90+% of what's going on, but can't share it at time for the government to do anything about it. The consequence is the offense will always win. We will be doing the best we can. We'll, as Karen said, we'll do everything we can to make sure you don't use password as your password, to do all these things. But humans are going to make mistakes. So I believe 3 things have to occur. I got all these pictures and I had all this put together, but I think what you have to do is you have to create a real-time platform. And I want to give you a vision for what that should be. Not just for what my company does, but more importantly, for what we should do collectively. And that is you've got to be able to see the data at network speed, understand what's going on based on behaviors, not signatures. Because signatures can be adapted by the adversary faster than you can create the hash algorithm to block them. You lose that one. So you need a way of going after it with behavioral-based. You want to leverage signatures, but you need a behavioral-based system. There are issues with behavioral-based systems. Too many false positives. So you need an expert system to take the events, enrich them, add rules to it, and rank them and find the bad stuff, and do it at speed. If you can do those 2 things, you can then take another step with that expert system and add machine learning and AI. Why do you want to do that? Well, you have to increase the speed because of the complexity, the number of applications, the number of devices. And if you do those 3 things, and the adversary now starts to attack you using AI to adapt malware, you have a defensible system that can adapt your defense to track that malware as it adapts. And then finally, if you think about every person in this audience as your own network, imagine that if you put your events up into a cloud, secured, and you could see what's hitting everybody at speed for collective defense. You would all know what's being attacked. You would know what to do about it. But more importantly, let's say every one of you had 10 cyber specialists working for you. Imagine the crowdsourcing capabilities of those 10 people working together across all of you. That's thousands. And if the best expert comes from GCHQ on a topic like domain DNS tunneling or domain generation algorithm, then that person stands up and said, this is bad. Everybody would know it. We'd benefit from that knowledge. And over there, somebody has knowledge there, and somebody has knowledge there. We don't do that today. We have a few people and hope they're knowledgeable in everything, but collectively, we have knowledge that would transpond all of that. Okay, so I think a couple things. If you do that and you share it, the thing that excited me about coming here today was not the great food and the hospitality. It was the opportunity to talk to all of you, all of us. How do we work together? How do nations work together? How do our cyber commands work together so that you can see the picture? What the young military officers have a responsibility to do to defend their nation is even better when they work with NATO, with the EU, with their allies to see what's going on. So we need a system that can make that possible. So, together, what I believe is we have to create that picture in cyberspace. We have to create a real-time picture that we can share that allows and helps us work together collectively for common defense. It's based on behavioral analytics, an eventing engine that works at network speed, powered by machine learning and AI. And all of that is infinitely doable. And that's where I think we need to go. Where our country needs to go, where your country needs to go, and what we need to do together to defend our nations in cybersecurity. Thank you very much.